Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Ms. Marvel has wrapped up, and I'm so excited to be talking about representation and what this show meant and all the things that we can learn from it with Zuhair Ali and Emily Cissell. All that and more after this commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. I'm Matthew, your host, they, them pronouns, and I have two wonderful guests here. First, if you've been listening to the MCU podcast on Ms. Marvel, if you haven't, you definitely should. They've been going episode by episode about Ms. Marvel, and one of the guests has been Zuhair. Zuhair, it's so good to have you with us. Just say a bit about yourself. Introduce yourself.
Hey guys, I'm Zuhair Ali. For the sake of this discussion, I am from Pakistan, moved here when I was 3. I am quite the nerd. Grew up as one, proud to be one. I am a photographer by trade, live in Virginia. I am also a martial artist. I train Filipino martial arts. And a more recent hobby of mine is that I like to podcast. So here I am.
Awesome. Yeah, great to have you. And Emily is a returning guest as well. Zuhair has also been on the show. But Emily, if you remember our podcasts about teaching and using teaching as a way to talk about superheroes, that's Emily talking about what she does in the classroom. So good to have you back as well.
Thanks. So Emily Cissell, she, her, hers pronouns. And yeah, I am clearly a social studies school teacher and have been on this podcast. I've also been on Zoo's podcast and such. And I run panels and professional development for teachers on how they can utilize comics and pop culture in the classroom.
That's fantastic. And I've had a couple people just people over the time who I've connected with on other forums have found out when I find out they're a teacher, I always kind of point them to your stuff and say, hey, this is something you can check out. And Zuhair's podcast is Animation Deliberation. It's fantastic. If you like animation, or even if you don't, if you think you don't, listening to them will probably give you a whole new opinion on it. So definitely check that out.
If you need a reason to get into it, then head over.
Definitely. Well, I'm so glad to have both of you on here. So let's just start with kind of your overall thoughts on, I know both of you had talked about how excited you were for the show, all the things you thought it would mean to you. Zuhair, you've had 6 episodes to talk about this. Let me start with Emily. Emily,
fair.
talk a bit about why you were so excited going into this and sort of how you felt it paid off.
So my boyfriend says it the best in that I am Kamala Khan. Where literally Iman Vellani has talked about how I'm Kamala Khan, but my person is Tony Stark, and Robert Downey Jr. I'm just Kamala Khan. It's Captain Marvel for me. And so getting to kind of feel represented as a super, super awkward, geeky girl that gets to get superpowers and embracing them. Although I am very, very, very white passing, my family is Mexican as well. And so getting to see a lot of those immigrant stories and such was super impactful. I mean, if it puts it in perspective, I cried several times throughout the series, not necessarily even super emotional moments, but I was overwhelmed with just how giddy and happy I was. I mean, you couldn't watch an episode without smiling.
Yeah.
You cannot watch an episode without smiling of that show. And it's brilliant. It did complete justice to the comics runs. I mean, it's not an exact iteration, but I'm telling you, there were so many of those comics lines all throughout those 6 episodes. It was phenomenal. And I mean, they paid tribute to it all the time with the animation and with the credits at the end showing different comic panels. And then even in the 6th episode, there was the cameo from the creator of Kamala Khan, Willow Wilson, in the TikTok videos.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I love things like that.
The whole thing is just kind of an overwhelmingly great experience watching the show.
That's awesome. Zuhair, what about for yourself?
Writing off of Emily's thoughts a little bit, I agree 100% in the fact that I teared up quite a bit in every episode as well. Just because Marvel's new thing for Phase 4 is just amazing dialogue, and their ability to convey what we need to hear without directly shoving real world stuff in our face is really impressive. And Miss Marvel, surprisingly, was actually the show that I was most nervous about because it was so connected to me being Pakistani and Muslim and all that. and it paid off as definitely being one of my favorite shows in Phase. It is my favorite show in Phase 4, and not even because of all of that stuff being too overbearing. It was tied in perfectly with just a really good story. So for them to speak Urdu and, you know, wear shalwar kurta and go down desi streets and stuff like that and talk about the food and have old Bollywood music, new Bollywood music, stuff that I could sing along to because I'd heard it a million times before. That it really was icing on the cake of just what really was a great story that took the history, took the culture, and expressed it to the world in the most beautiful way they could.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know what you mean about how there's kind of a little bit of a danger there, you know, when you're really counting on, like, this is going to be the first time I'm going to see myself really represented in this world. And like, I know when Hawkeye was coming out, you know, they were really going to deal with disability and there was going to be a one-legged character. I was really nervous about it. And they did it fantastically, and it felt so good, especially after feeling like, you know, Loki was supposed to be the queer character and explore some non-binary stuff, and that did not go well in the slightest. And so this was such a it's really beautiful to hear you say that. And for me, as someone, I'll kind of name where I am in all this. I am not Pakistani. I'm not a woman. I'm not Muslim. So 90% of this was watching it as an outsider, and I really loved both how much I learned about this, but also how much I could relate to things in terms of seeing things as, okay, I don't have that experience, but that shows me that experience is pretty much like my own in some other ways. I mean, very unique still. And for me, I would start with, and kind of curious to hear your thoughts on this, Zuhair, the scene in the scenes in the mosque. And I don't just mean the prayer scenes, but the scenes about the mosque community. As a former pastor and as someone who spent a lot of time in Christian congregations and also spent a lot of time talking to rabbis and to pastors about their congregations, it really made me think about the fact that I'd never seen just the life of a Muslim congregation before. You know, that every time I'd seen a mosque on screen, it was because there were terrorists there or because the cops were doing bad things there. But just seeing things like the different cliques or the politics around the election and thinking, and thinking like, that's what my church does. That's what synagogue, that's what religious, like when people get together to be religious together, they're going to form cliques. They're going to have little politics stuff. That hit me so hard as something where it's like, I've never seen this part of mosque life, and I'm so glad to be, it's demystifying that.
Yeah, it was actually funny because, was it episode 3 that had Eid in it, or was it 2?
I think it was episode 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so they were talking about how there's like different Eids and there's not just one throughout the year, and how there was like a smaller one, and that's what this was celebrating. That Eid was actually last Saturday, and the amount of people that texted me, they were like, "Hey, what clique were you in?" Was just hilarious, because now there's the curiosity of like, "Hey, how did your Eid go? What did you do? What did your Khana do?" So it was really cool just being able to like talk about that a little more, because it's just something of like, hey, I'm out of town for a holiday, like you're not going to care why, so I'm not going to give you any details about it. But now like the questions opened up, it's like, did your family come in, how long were you there for, what did you guys do, what did you eat? And the fact that the show came out with such perfect timing of like being able to ask those questions. And one of the coolest dialogue from the show was actually when Kamala's mom was talking about the importance of having that community, because a lot of people come, like my parents came to the United States to give me a better opportunity for education. My sister wasn't born at the time, but obviously the intent was the same for her. And so a lot of those people come with that intent of whether it be business opportunities or freedom opportunity, because of whatever the conditions may be at the time, you know, they come. It takes so much bravery to come over to the side. So to find that community and to build, you have to build a family from scratch, essentially. Like, I can't tell the amount of times we're hanging out and it's like, oh, this is my cousin, how are you related? It's like, I actually don't know. Our parents were just in this part of Muscat for a period of time and were related somehow. We actually might not be. It's just like lineage of like tribes and families like growing up together. So that dialogue of like, this is why mosques are important, this is why churches are important, this is why community building is super important, because, you know, it's your family's not always going to be your family by definition, you know, like sometimes it is just blood, and to have an opportunity to be yourself and to have the people who actually have your back and lift you to be the best version of yourself is dialogue that was super crucial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think part of why I think that scene struck me so much is that when I have talked to people who have, I mean, I don't mean people who are like raging Islamophobes, but just people who are ignorant or don't really understand, and realizing like what we learn about Islam, unfortunately, because this country is so bad at these things, you know, it's like praying towards Mecca and 5 times. It's all these things that are meant to make it seem so different and so foreign. And like, I think there's a danger of being like, oh, it's just like us. It's not. It's a different religion. But being able to see, like you said, like when people come together, when families come together, I really hope a lot of people saw that scene and saw themselves in that way. And like, yeah, this is a religious community. It's different than ours, but it's not strange or different. It's just it's something else.
This is exactly why I have my students read Ms. Marvel No Normal, those first 5 issues. And we do it when we are learning monotheistic religions, because Willow Wilson has this amazing ability of just throwing in all these Christian motifs and all these like references to Judaism throughout the comic and creating a direct comparison the entire time that she is writing the storyline. And it's a total like underneath thing that's happening, but you can see it in the imagery and you can see it in the language. Bruno, they haven't brought it up yet, but he is like so Catholic, like unbelievably Catholic, and his grandparents are Catholic. I mean, they brought up Italian, but it's a huge point of like, you literally set this white Catholic boy on one pedestal, and then you have this Pakistani Muslim girl on the other, and you can sit there and you can compare and contrast them the whole time. And the show does a great job of doing that as well, and being able to see that and educate people.
Yeah, not to go like too much into theology or anything, but you know, you brought up monotheistic religions, and it really is like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all have the same history. There was just all one point where it ended up splitting off a little bit, and
you get some
it really does come down to the culture. Like when we had our interview with Anjali Bhimani, like we were talking about how vast like the Islamic Empire was at one point. Like there was a portion of the Philippines that are primarily Muslim. Like you think about like Singapore and Malaysia are the largest Muslim populations in the world. You would think it's the Middle East. But then the Middle East itself has it, and then Pakistan has it, India has it, large parts of Africa. There was a part where Spain was part of, sorry, I'm forgetting which, Ottoman Empire. Spain was part of the Ottoman Empire. Like a lot of their architecture and artwork and the glasswork and the domes, like all of that is Islamic structure. So you can't expect, you know, to hear Islam and think that one culture is tied to it, because it's on so many parts of the world that, and it's influenced so much of the world that like there really is a huge distinction between me being a Muslim and being a Pakistani. They're two very different things.
Right.
And it's the same thing as somebody being Catholic and British, or Catholic and American, and like your religion and your ethnicity are two very different things, and they had a great opportunity to express both of them as individual things.
Yeah. In seminary, one of my favorite professors really kind of harped on the idea that when people say like Judeo-Christian, that sense, that comment makes no sense, in part because it's often used by Christians to try and like railroad over Jews, but also because it's cutting out Islam entirely. And that if you're trying to talk about like the Abrahamic religions all share quite a lot in common. And like, you know, I've definitely talked to Buddhists and people from other like non-Abrahamic traditions who be like, yeah, from our eyes, you're all very similar.
Yep.
And I think that, but Islam is so often left out. Edward Said in the book Orientalism does a fantastic job of kind of getting deeper into this. But, you know, yeah, to me, that's one of the things it did. It's like really exploding the idea of like that the Judeo-Christian, and then there's Islam somewhere really far over there.
Yeah, especially with the imagery and stuff. Like, it's so funny to see like how Jesus is portrayed and how Prophet Muhammad is portrayed, because like one actually came out of the other. Like we refer to him as Prophet Isa. Like Jesus was a part of that history. It's just
He wasn't the main dude.
Literally the only difference is that he just wasn't the son of God, because if God does not beget, nor is he begotten, like how does he have an offspring? So like
Right.
Jesus is a prophet, just like Muhammad is a prophet, just like Abraham is a prophet. So for them to like show it as such a distinct thing when they're relatively on the same part of the world, it's just something that cracks me up as I've gotten older and just kind of understood like how much of it really is the same thing, and how wars have started around the world just because somebody practices slightly different than somebody else does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's truly ridiculous, and I love that about the show. So what else? Like, I think that one of the reasons why I want to have both you on is because I think it's also easy to be like, oh, Ms. Marvel, that's the show that did South Asian and Muslim representation, and the kind of like. But I think there's so much more that goes into it. We've talked about the Islamic side of it. What else in terms of representation really spoke to either one of you?
So I think, because I got into this conversation with actually a comic book seller at a con a while back, because he was also Hispanic, and we were talking about how, like, you know, what current writers we're absolutely loving because of what they're doing, and how excited we are for Ms. Marvel because Willow Wilson is amazing. And what's fascinating is the older school comics, when they were like so-called, you know, very progressive. Stan Lee was progressive for his time, but anytime they had a character that was not white, and if they like had slightly different language, the big one we could think of was being Hispanic and speaking Spanish. And in the comics, who it was directly geared for was very clearly still a white person, and it's making them feel better because they threw somebody in there that was their token Hispanic or your token black guy or, you know, anything like that. And like the Spanish parts in the comics would be directly translated and stuff like that. And it brings in the key phrase of like, existence is not representation. Just because you make somebody exist does not mean you are representative of them. And what was really cool about Shang-Chi and Black Panther and now Ms. Marvel is that they're not just existence, they're there. They're real, and it's not like they're fully thought out characters. I mean, like the Urdu, a lot of it is not translated for you, like in the subtitles, because I'm one of those people that can't hear without subtitles. A lot of it is not translated. And so like Zoo would actually like mention different things that like I never would have known because I don't speak Urdu. But you know what? It makes me actually have to dig a little deeper and learn a little more, because it's not just existence. They're there and they're real. And it makes me excited that they're doing all this because, you know, they're bringing, again, as somebody who's Hispanic, they're bringing in Namor and they're making him Hispanic. And the actor has been learning the Mayan language. And I like...
Oh, really? That's awesome.
I can't wait to sit there and like the experience that Zoo has had. I can't wait to sit there and be like listening to like different Spanish and like hearing the Aztec and Mayan myths and be like, my abuelito sat down there the whole time and like he would tell me these things and like
I mean just educating people that like, you know, Yucatan, just educating people that Yucatan and like the Mayan population is not these like is somewhat different in some ways from the rest of Mexico. Like that alone would be amazing.
And the number of languages alone, Guatemala has 29 national languages. Spanish is 28 other dialects of Mayan. I mean, like, I can get in a whole other thing there. But it's the idea that they're not just existing, like they are real and people can sit there and actually visibly see everything. I mean, I have students in hijab that get to sit there and read comics and see somebody that looks like them for the first time.
Yeah. And I think there's just nothing like that. And I really like what you talked about how these characters sometimes came from a very different kind of perspective. Like, I forget his name, but the creator of Luke Cage, the TV show, you know, he talked very well about this, about how the creator of Luke Cage, the TV show, he really had a lot to say about this, about how Luke Cage was a character really born out of exploitation. Yeah. And like, it was a character for white people who wanted to see, you know, kind of shuck and jive kind of ideas of a black person. And it was a good character even from the start, but there was a lot that was really problematic. And how that having him put on the old Power Man costume was in part meant to kind of like be like, hey, look, we're acknowledging that past, but look how different this is now.
And that show did a really great job of showing American Black culture, because that's a whole other subsection of culture separate from African culture and from Jamaican culture and Haitian culture. And like, it's not the best show in the world. It's got problems, of course, but like my boyfriend, he's Black, and sitting there and seeing, everything going down in the barber shops and stuff, it made him feel very seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that sense of being seen, that's kind of what we're talking about through all of this, and why that's so important. And so, Zu, for you, you talked about how being Pakistani and being Muslim are two different parts of your identity. Mm-hmm. Talk about the Pakistani and the South Asian representation, and what about that really spoke to you?
It's cool because they got to see a lot of stuff that was like, oh man, they really hit the nail on the head with the food and the outfits and speaking Urdu and all that stuff. But it's like I said on Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast, is just, you got to see all the toxicity too, like the gossiping aunties and the security issues, and you're expected to do this. Like, one of the things that got me to tear up is that towards the end of it, Kamala Khan actually had supportive Pakistani parents, which that is not a typical sight. I could go on and on about like my relationship with my dad, but like my mom has been one of the most supportive people, because I decided to be a photographer instead of an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer. And basically, like, my whole community thought that I was a failure before I ever even made it into school, because they were like, you're going to get a job in that? Like, why aren't you doing anything else? It's like, I suck at reading books and taking tests. That's why, auntie. I'm a visual learner. I work on my feet. I can't sit still. So that's the career that I chose. And while my mom was nervous for me, she was very much on the end of like, hey, if you can take business classes or something to have as a fallback, that'd be great. But if this is really what you want to do, then go for it. And then another big instance being, my dad would actually get upset that I was spending money going to the theaters and buying Blu-rays and, nerdy posters and stuff like that. And she was like, why do you let him spend money on all that stuff? And my mom just goes like, he's in college. He could be out like doing drugs or partying or drinking. I know on a Saturday night he's at home watching Iron Man for the 50th time. So like that level of support and understanding for like what your child wants to do and what they want to pursue and just the way that they think and how they are is something that you don't typically see. And I think that's one of those things that, because now that it's on screen, it's like you get a little taste of like what that's actually like. So there is a lot of toxicity in Pakistani culture and how the people treat each other and what they expect of each other. Little scenes like when Kamala was trying on her wedding outfit, and at first her mom was like, it's long on you. But when the auntie came in, she said, you're too short for it. She was like, yeah, she's right. You are too short for it. So it's like the toxicity of like, you have a horde of people looking at you at all times, and the people you expect to have your back not necessarily be there. To see the flip side of that was really cool.
Yeah, I can really see that. And for me, it's so powerful hearing you talk about that, because one thing I was really struck by, and there's a podcast I really love called Desi Geek Girls, and they're both Indian, they're not Pakistani, but they're South Asian, and they talked a lot about how much this show spoke to them. And they made a comment about that they said it was that really struck me, that it was showing the problems that can happen, but not doing it from an insider, not an outsider perspective, and talked about how it'd be very easy for a scene like that to come off in a way that made white people think, oh, okay, see, look, we're better. We don't have that kind of toxicity. We don't have like the problems in our religious communities of that a girl can't get elected, or we don't have the kind of family stuff you're talking about. But instead, it felt to me like it was showing, a community, the good and the bad, but not in a way of being like, look, anyone else can feel better about their community. It was saying, because I mean, like, my father didn't love some of the stuff I got into. It's not the same by any means, but like all the stuff that I saw Kamala going through with her family, I was both seeing it from the particular, like, this is different than anything I will ever understand because of the community, but also I can relate to a lot of it. It didn't feel like exotic and different. I know we keep talking about that. I don't mean to keep bringing that point up, but to me, the more important point here is just the fact that it was shown from inside the community instead of like, it didn't feel like someone judging the Pakistani community at all.
Yeah, I mean, really hats off to the writers and producers and directors and cast. When the first little snippet came out that this show was happening, like the people who were talking about it on that little extra were like in tears that they actually had a whole cast full of Pakistanis and Arabs and Muslims that are going to be working on this show, and it really paid off. Like with that interview with Anjali Bhimani, like she talks about how Kevin Feige himself said that it was important that we're not only going to represent, but we're going to celebrate Pakistani culture.
Mm.
And he made that very clear from the get-go that that's what he expected of the staff to do, and I think they accomplished it.
They definitely did. And one of my favorite characters, I mean, we didn't see her tons in, these 6 episodes, but in the comics is actually the brother's wife, and that they actually show and represent that, like, not all Muslims are from Southwest Asia, like because of how much it's spread and stuff like that. And it's just like all those little tiny bits and things just make it so wonderful.
Yeah, I loved her character especially, and the moment we got to see her parents, because it also kind of confirmed, like, yeah, this is probably either she or her family converted at some point.
Yeah.
Because growing up in New York City in the 80s and 90s, unfortunately, the only exposure I had to the idea of Black people in America being Muslim was Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam and all that kind of stuff. And, like, again, just the ignorance of how I was taught and what I knew. And in later years, really coming to learn, like, no, that there is, like, a large, population within Black people in America, some of whom have always been Muslim, some of whom have converted in recent years or gone back to the traditions. I had a wonderful professor who loved to talk about how if you look at a lot of, like, the spirituals, that, like, the music that came from the slaves, there are songs like, as I fall on my knees with my face to the rising sun, that, like, it's Islamic references because a lot of those folks were Islamic when they were kidnapped. I just love that character, and I hope a lot of other people had that experience of, like, yeah, it's not, the media loves to focus on Nation of Islam and stuff like that, and that is by no means that they're portrayed in a lot of really problematic ways, and that's bad enough, but that doesn't speak for the Black Islamic experience in America.
And a lot of oh, sorry, Zoo.
It was so small but really quick of the scene of the fire alarm when, like, both the weddings were outside and the 2 brides were like, you look really beautiful. It's
best.
like, you do too.
I loved that.
It was
I loved that so much.
It was the absolute best. I was like, yes, that is what girls are supposed to do for one another. Because it's showing intersectionality feminism, that we all support each other. It doesn't matter your race, religion, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, all of that, or your pronoun, any of it. It just made me so happy. And then, like, in America, the number of Black people have converted to the Muslim religion, it's actually, it's a situational irony because a lot of America views it as, like, hey, violent religion and terrorism and all of those terrible things that are completely inaccurate. But a lot of people, like Muhammad Ali, they converted and they changed because it's a peaceful religion. And that I just quickly wanted to throw that out there, that it, like, throughout history, seeing it as a peaceful religion, it actually is one. And then how it's been just manipulated by wrong people. The same with any religion.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. And to me also, as someone for whom, like, when I was a pastor, the idea of sanctuary in my church was very important. We had one situation where a undocumented immigrant was being, was, like, they were trying to deport him, and he came and stayed at our church for 2 weeks because, like, we were providing sanctuary like that. And so hearing the imam talk about, hearing the imam talk about, like, no, this, you can't come to this mosque for this reasons, and you can't, like, we're providing sanctuary, and seeing him do that and help the kid, help Karam. Am I pronouncing that? Kamran, thank you. Get away. I like you, Emily, was reading as much as I was listening. It just really struck me so hard.
It is, and it was such an excellent point where Nakia's like, no. Like, yeah, it's a religious place, but you're in a mosque in America, and we have all these damage control people who have no care in the world for any religion. I can't tell you the number of times I was getting so pissed off they wouldn't take off their shoes. I'm like, if you're gonna just storm in there,
I think I felt.
Could you just show some respect for them? Like,
yeah,
it was just such a great and wonderful scene. And Nakia in particular had so many great lines and moments. I mean, I can't wait to show all of my students the scene where she's talking about hijab specifically and what it means for her specifically as a female, as somebody. I believe they hinted that she was biracial, and that she is in the comics, that she is half white and then half Pakistani.
Is it confirmed that she's Pakistani? Because she didn't even say that. She said that she was like a mix, like just half American and.
Yeah, in the comics she is, but again, they're making their own leniencies with things, so who knows? It's where they decide. But she.
I mean, I was going to say that one was helpful because to me, I assumed she was Middle Eastern. And then she did mention having interracial parents. I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm making a false assumption here, and that alone I thought was helpful. And I don't think that was entirely accidental, that they let you get to know her for a couple episodes and then told you she was interracial.
Oh yeah, it was the same thing in the comics. I mean, it was like 10 or 12 issues where you're like, oh, okay, it's just her Pakistani friend, and she's biracial, and like her parents actually don't want her to wear a hijab, but. She talks very specifically about what that experience means to her as a Muslim and as a woman, specifically in America. And she just had so many great lines and just bits of conversation that just kind of open up the dialogue and open up a conversation just within homes. Like, at least like for me watching it with Reed the whole time, I mean, like, there were so many moments where you could literally just like feel how there was almost like a pause, like, hey, pause here. And let's talk as a family in this family room about what's happening on the show.
Yeah. Yeah, really beautifully done. I mean, between that dialogue and the dialogue in Halo and Young Justice, like the fact that DC and Marvel have both had a recent experience of talking about hijabs to their parents and to their family members and friends has been like, whoa, the exposure's like really getting out there. And the fact that like a majority even doesn't have anything to do with religion, like it is just a preference, whether it be from your culture, whether it be like your ideals and what you stand for. Because like from my understanding, the story that I was told is that the reason that people started wearing a hijab was because when people went to the prophet for advice, he would get his wives to cover up so that they're not distracted from like why they were in his home. It's like you're here to talk to the prophet, all distractions are put aside. So there was a misinterpretation of like, oh, because the prophet wraps up his wives, we should do that to our wives because we need to be like as important as the prophet is. And that's how that tradition began. So like it has nothing to do with the religion of it at all. It's just a matter of like, there was this perspective, it evolved into this, and now it's like a choice that women make. Because even when I got to visit Karachi at the malls, like there were some girls who were in, you know, skinny jeans and tank tops, and then there was girls who were in full burqas. So it's like, it really is a choice of how you dress and what that represents and what that means to you.
It really puts it in perspective in terms of like the cultural component of it. I have a lot of students from Afghanistan, and the females are very, very like strict on their hijab wearing and covering up. But then I also have several students from Pakistan, and they are significantly more lenient. And then I have students who are from Ethiopia, and they are extremely strict. And then I have a few students from India, and they don't believe in hijab at all. It's a family thing, but then culturally as well, you can see it among different countries and regions of the world, how that's developed and changed.
And that's one thing I thought... I think that's something that's great, and I really appreciated that Nakia and Kamala were friends, especially because clearly, like, Nakia she doesn't judge Kamala for not wearing one.
No,
it's Nakia's choice, and she feels okay with it. For me, a lot of my exposure to it really came when I spent a couple of weeks in Egypt, where one thing I learned there was at least the understanding is that it became an important part of Egyptian culture again in the 1800s when the French army was there, because the army was treating Egyptian women so terribly that they started wearing the hijab again as a way of kind of like covering and protecting. And you can get into all sorts of sides of that kind of a story. But like when I was in Egypt, I mean, I saw both of what you're talking about, but I also saw women in skinny jeans and tank tops and very high heels and looking incredible and hijab. and it wasn't sort of a like you can wear hijab, and because to me that was the stereotype I had, was hijab as part of like covering yourself entirely, and that seeing someone who's like, yeah, I'm gonna express myself and my femininity and look damn sexy and also wear the hijab, and that all made sense for someone, and I just really appreciate the way the show kind of opened up all those kind of different perspectives.
Yeah, they're very fashionable and stylish now.
Oh, some of the most gorgeous women in the world I've seen wear hijab and they don't show their hair. One of my best friends, she's from Saudi Arabia, and she says, she's like, guys aren't allowed to see my hair. They're not worthy. And that's like her whole perspective of wearing hijab and covering her hair. Because like I would always see it, and then she would, like, if our roommate's boyfriend would come over, she would completely cover up and stuff like that. And we had like a conversation after many glasses of wine one night, and she was like, they're not worthy of this. They don't deserve seeing all of this. I'm gorgeous with it. Do you think they could stand to see me without it? And
I like it.
It just absolutely cracked me up.
And it was such a small scene in episode 3, but when Nakia is like super exhausted and she comes into Kamala's room, just like face plants onto her bed. Yeah, first thing she did was rip that thing off. I think I was like, I wonder how many people notice that they're actually like seeing her with hair for the first time, because she's in a comfortable space where she's okay to just leave it off.
I have a question about that, but I want to just say one comment quick. That one thing I also noticed is that compared to Kamala, Nakia wore a lot of makeup and was seen in high heels a couple times. Kamala very rarely was wearing makeup, and that was just a really nice thing of showing that, like, yeah, they can have different approaches to all these different parts of who they are. I appreciate you bringing up that scene, Zuhair, because one thing I've seen some discourse around is that on the one hand, that scene was really great, that showing that she could take off her hijab around Kamala, but that for some folks that, they would want an actress who wears a hijab, who is hijabi, to play this the character. And that would mean not showing her hair, to millions of people on TV. I'm curious how, and I've heard a lot of back and forth on that. And it's one that I think what they did in terms of that representation and showing that she could take her hijab off made a lot of sense to me. But I'm kind of curious to both of you what you think of that argument of, like, would it have been better to have her played by an actress that actress wears the hijab all the time?
No, it makes sense now. Like, see, my perspective is always like, if you're gonna have an actor portray a certain role, they just have to nail the role, right? And that is the reality of it. That it's like have you stepped outside lately? It's really freaking hot. Like, if she's wearing that thing all day and has an opportunity to sit in someone's room and take it off, like, that is stuff that needs to be depicted, because that is part of the culture where it's like they just open up around women, and the fact that she was in a space that she was comfortable enough to do that, because it's not like she was in the house and had it out in the living room where Amir or her dad could have walked in. It was just a matter that it was specifically walked in the room, slammed the door, and then was just like, I'm free, I can just take this off for a little bit. And
they did kind of show the other perspective with Amir's wife, and that she, like, never takes off her hijab. I mean, like, technically, when she marries him, she can take off hijab in the house around all of them, because that is now her father, that is her husband, but she was still wearing hijab the entire time. And she is somebody that's extremely strict on that. Now, the actress, I don't believe, is Muslim, so, I mean, maybe they could have done better with that casting, but they did show the two perspectives.
Yeah, but they nailed the role, so, like, it doesn't bother me if they're Muslim in real life or not, because, like, you limit yourself, because what if it's, like, you only want a Muslim actor, but then they're not that great at acting, so they don't portray the role properly? Like, they portrayed the role properly, and that's what's important at the end. I do not care what their lives are outside of their role, as long as they portray that properly. And that's specifically the Percy Jackson, the Olympian series. Like, they're creating a series or a TV series, and the author very specifically was like, when we're casting for the roles, I don't care about their ethnicity or anything. If they can portray a 12-year-old and they're within the age range, that's all I care about, because we want them to grow up with the series. Yeah. And a girl, Annabeth Chase, who is white and blonde hair and gray-eyed, they casted a black girl.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. Yeah. And I do want to, like, speak up a little bit, like, I do want to defend a little bit the idea of like that when you're casting people from marginalized communities, I do think it's like, for me, the movie Fire Island is entirely about queer communities, and all the actors are queer, and to me that really made a lot of sense. And so I do push back just a bit that I do think there is some value in trying to make sure that people are portraying the experience have had the experience of what they're portraying. But you're right. I definitely understand why for this character, like having her be able to take the hijab off is a very important moment and of representation. And so an actress who wouldn't do that, like, yeah, I can see why that makes a lot of sense.
For me, I could,
because if she did a bad job, I totally would be on the same train of like, why didn't they get somebody that did it? But that's not the case. Like, she nailed it.
And for Nakia, I mean, like the entire, like it made me feel like I was back in college with that friend from Saudi Arabia, because she literally would just huff inside our apartment and just throw it off. And then like the same way women, when we get home, a lot of times like we take our bra off because it's very constricting and we don't want to be constricted anymore. And it felt very comfortable and like friendly, and it brought back a lot of good feelings for me personally.
Yeah.
And two big examples last year were, I'm forgetting the actor's name, but the one Pakistani guy that was in, oh my God, what is the Korean show that took off last year?
Squid Games?
Squid Games.
Mm-hmm.
The Pakistani guy that was in Squid Games was an Indian actor, and then you have a Pakistani guy playing Kingo in Eternals, who was supposed to be an Indian person. So it's like, am I supposed to be mad that they had the Pakistani play the Indian guy and the Indian play the Pakistani guy, or am I supposed to be happy that they were on screen and they nailed it? Because, again, the Pakistani guy was doing Hindu traditional stuff during the marriage and the funeral. The Indian actor was speaking in Urdu and throwing in parts of Islam in his dialogue. Like, they nailed their roles, and at the end of the day, they learned about a culture to hit their role, and they nailed it to a play where, as the audience, we believe that they are who they portray to be because they did such a good job.
And can we just appreciate the fact that Kamala's mom and Kamran's mom both had massive crushes on Kingo, the Bollywood star?
I totally missed that dialogue too, because I was so fixated on the Shah Rukh Khan movies that they were talking about that it totally like went over my head that they were talking about Kingo, because I was like, I was with them like, yes, DDLJ is overrated and that there are better Shah Rukh Khan movies out there and this and that somebody reminded us, like, what did you think of the Kingo stuff? I was like, they mentioned it?
Oh my God, it's hilarious. And now there's the set photos of Loki where they have the Kingo posters in the background.
Yeah.
It just makes
that's so
wonderful.
Good. It's so good.
He's just integrating everywhere.
I know Marvel used to do shorts a lot, and I kind of hope they bring it back just because I want to see, I don't expect them to make a full Kingo Bollywood movie, though I would love that, but just give us like 15 minutes, 15 minutes of get a Bollywood director, like really do it right. I'd love that.
And they only did that hint of it in Eternals where he was playing Icarus, and it would have been cool if they had actually had that kind of like scene and they had it playing like on a TV in the background at some point, or anything like that would have been really cool.
Yeah, unpopular opinion, but I'll take the Marvel one-shots over all of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Fair. I disagree quite a bit, although I do have a podcast on the Marvel Movie Minute where I talked about a funny thing happened on the way to Thor's Hammer. You should definitely check it out. I even wrote a song for it. I do love Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. though, so I'm with you on that, Emily.
Oh my God, Deke, Sean Fitzsimmons are life.
So, just though on the point of the fandoms that the characters were into, the thing that I was really struck by, and again felt like such important, like, yeah, show this, was Kamala's parents being so into Bon Jovi.
Yes.
Because I think, again, like, one of the things that I experienced as someone who was born here, and I hear stories about the family of mine that immigrated back in the 1800s, but at this point it's stories passed down. I don't have the immigrant experience. It was very easy for me to kind of feel like, or to think, and again, this is bad thinking, but it's just how I grew up. Like, okay, I hear someone with a strong accent, and I hear them talk about like their music, their culture, so they're not going to know about like Star Wars or my culture or things like that. And like seeing that the parents loved Bon Jovi, like at this point, it's not a surprise to me anymore, but I can understand how it just felt like such a good moment to show, like, yeah, they love all of this stuff. They love the culture, but also, yeah, they live in America or even around the world. You would hear Bon Jovi. And showing that people can love all of it was so important.
Even them choosing where they moved in America, where they're talking about loving Bruce Springsteen and Bon Jovi. I mean, like, that is the area you would move to if you loved them.
Yep. I do need to say, just on the representation point, Paul Hoppy, who's my regular, very, very common guest, he won't be a co-host, very, very regular guest, they won't be a co-host, but he did point out one thing, which is that in Jersey City, where he lived and where he took his driving test, they take driving tests on like a closed course, not on the street. So one part of representation they got wrong, but I think we got so much else right that we can probably let that slide. But I just needed to bring that up, just need to mention that.
Well, okay, also, when did he get his driver's license?
A couple of years ago. I grew up in New York City, and so like we both didn't drive as kids. We didn't need to. So
okay, because I was about to say, like, if he had done it like a while ago, it may have changed to what it was today. But
or they were on a driving course, but we never got to see it because she crashed so quick.
Yeah, that's possible. Like, we were just supposed to drive to the driving course.
She was supposed to get there, and she didn't get there.
Yeah, all possible. But just, some things didn't work. But we talked so much about those parts of Kamala's identity. Emily, I know you've talked about some about like it also being a teenage girl, and that not something we see very often in the MCU, in these kind of television shows. What about that part of the character really spoke to you and how it was represented?
It's, I guess for me in particular, being the really geeky teenage girl that like passed by with like decent grades but was constantly zoning out in class. I mean, like, it's wild because exactly the way they portray her like zoning out and seeing everything, that is quite literally what goes on in my brain. And like, I have ADD, and when I zone out, that's what the world looks like to me, and it's really weird and absurd, but that's just what my brain does. And getting to see all of that, I was like, oh man, this is great. And then just getting to see like her being so unbelievably awkward and having those moments of like, oh, well, I used to be friends with her, but then she kind of like stopped talking to us, and now I'm not really sure where I stand with Zoe. And that happens pretty much to everybody, girls and guys. But here's what they don't tell you for girls, is that eventually, after you get past that little stage of I don't know if we're friends or not, there is almost always a moment, and it's usually later high school, college, when all of a sudden you actually talk to those people again and you become friends with them again, or with those types of people again, because for the first time you're actually having a conversation with them instead of just trying to be awkward and ignore each other. And they showed that with Zoe, and it was such a little thing. And really nobody's going to pick up on it unless you're a female, and you kind of like went through that where like I lost like all my friends, all of them. But then I went to like college and stuff like that, and looking at me and hearing what I talk about, you would never know I joined a sorority. Like I was a sorority girl, and it was a way that I wanted to make female connections. And all those girls that like I never would have been friends with, all of a sudden I was like friends with them again. And it's like the weird stages of friendship for females and how we mature at different levels. They showed all of that, and it's super cool. They did a really great job of portraying a lot of social media things that teens go through currently. A lot of people, unless you're directly in the classroom, you do not notice it at all, but it's a very, very serious issue and problem. I mean, like, if we're talking about the TikTok trends, like, those are legitimate problems that we all went through. Like, the vandalism in our schools, every single one of us had to go through that and stuff like that. Right. And so portraying all of that among teenagers, and just Kamala means so much to me because, like if you took a tour through my house, you would see, like, posters of Carol Danvers, and you would see Captain Marvel literally everywhere, quite literally tattooed to my body. And I make all my own cosplays, and I go to these conventions, and
can't confirm on all points.
Oh my God. I just, everything about her just, makes me feel seen for like the first time ever. Like,
Yeah.
shows they don't show actual teenage girls or females going through certain things. It's why I'm so excited for She-Hulk, because now I'm older, right? Now I'm in my mid-20s to mid-30s, which is what She-Hulk is showing. And like they show those little clips of her like going on Tinder dates. Reed and I met on Tinder. Like,
that's awesome.
So like all those, like, between that show showing my high school and college experience, and then this next show going to be showing, you know, my like current adulthood experience as a millennial, it's unbelievably awesome. And they're getting the right female writers and directors behind all of this. So
yeah, I really love hearing that. And there are two things that jumped out for me. Well, I'll say the first one and hear both your thoughts on, and I'll say the first one, let y'all respond, and then go to the other. But just talking about Zoe and social media, I was so impressed with what they did with her in this episode, in this last episode, because the young girl who is obsessed with her appearance and her TikTok followers, and like that is a very easy to turn into, and I use the word obsessed, a very misogynistic stereotype that I think a lot of people have, and I see on TikTok all the time of people making fun of that. And so showing that, yeah, she had a lot of followers and she likes looking good on TikTok and she likes having that perspective. But the minute that like she still remembers Kamala saved her, and the minute she sees Kamala in trouble, not only is she happy to like run in and say, hey, I want to help, and like, hey, like, but also to use the power that she has. Like the fact that it's a white girl saying, hey, please come rescue us, we're in trouble here, is really important in that scene. And just to me, it was like they could have made that such a misogynistic stereotype and they blew it out of the water with Zoe. And I was so happy for that.
It's a cool transition in the comic line. I keep bringing up the comics, but again, they do all these little things from the comics and they put it in the show. She does that same type of transformation in the comics as well. It's not a bad thing that you want to look good and you necessarily like post on TikTok and Instagram and stuff like that. It's when it goes to a bad side, and they showed how it could go to the bad side, but then they were portraying a lot of like how it was beneficial. And then even Zoe at the end with all the little TikTok videos, like, hey, I want Nakia to speak on here because I'm using my platform for her to be able to have a voice in society as well.
And I loved that both because what she was doing was so good, and it was just a little bit of like white awkwardness that I loved as well. And both of those were so good.
When she was sitting in that room, I mean, like they had Bruno there, but Bruno's like practically part of the family. But her sitting there in that whole room with all of those Pakistani people and her just being like, hi.
Pakistanis roll deep.
I wanna help. I just like it's a weird comparison, but like some like cookouts and family reunions and stuff like that, when I'm like the one like kind of like token white person there, I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely feel that at times. And it's like it's a good thing to show, and like we should put ourselves to be uncomfortable in those situations and groups. But
yeah, kind of riding the social media a little bit. We talk about Zoe with her TikTok and whatnot, but what they didn't emphasize more of is Kamala was doing the same thing with her YouTube, right?
yeah.
Zoe was expressive with her looks and her trends and hitting all that. Kamala was expressive of like what mattered to her, which was superhero theories. And she was getting followers, she was getting likes, she was engaging with YouTubers, getting comments and stuff like that. So it's like she was just as big of a social media presence as Zoe, but Sloth Baby was the face of that, not necessarily Zoe. So it just kind of comes to like, I had this with my friends, where my friends, once we hit high school, they thought it was more important to be athletes and be cool, and it mattered what people thought of them, because we had to. I had the friends who were like, I'm going to tell people I'm Indian and not Pakistani because I don't want people to call me a terrorist. So they were like afraid of their identity. And then there was my nerdy ass who was still watching anime and into superhero movies and stuff like that. And, we all went our different directions, but now at 29, like I'm still hanging out with them like how we did in middle school. because those interests and those things that make us happy and things that kind of like help us take away from our everyday lives, like they matter to us and they're important, but we just don't care as much of like what people think about us expressing them, because we make adult paychecks now and control like how we want to pursue our lives and the steps that we want to take. And the fact that it comes full circles and we're able to do that with the people that we grew up with, and have less of pressure of how we portray ourselves, is kind of what brings it all back to, this is my circle, this is what we like, and this is just what we enjoy.
Yeah, I love that. I hadn't connected before that. You're right. The Kamala with YouTube, because I think they kind of dropped it after the first episode or two.
Mm-hmm.
But her with YouTube and Zoe with TikTok is the same. I mean, they're expressing different parts of themselves, but neither one is better or worse. And honestly, I know at some point they're going to meet in the movie Marvels. I want someone, maybe Captain Marvel, maybe Monica, maybe someone just be like, oh yeah, I've seen Sloth Baby. That's you. That's awesome. Like, I think that'd be really great.
I think it would be really great and even better if Darcy and Jimmy Woo were the ones that had seen all of that.
Yes, I love that.
They'll probably be a part of SWORD and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate
Peter Parker
that.
would be pretty cool too, because he had like his little video diaries of when Tony recruited him and all that stuff.
Yes.
So like, now that he doesn't have friends or anything, like imagine him being on social media, just be like, the Sloth Baby person's cool.
Yeah, I like it. Well, and also with the Captain America, and also with the Captain Marvel part, Emily, this is the other thing you mentioned that I wanted to go to. Like, I know a lot of people don't like Captain Marvel, and like anyone cannot like anything. I'm not saying you are sexist if you don't like it. It's totally legit. But there is an awful lot of sexism in some of the perspectives that people have on Captain Marvel.
Oh, yeah.
Some of it overt, like I just don't want women in MCU, and the people who talk about the MCU and all that nonsense. But also I think there was a lot of perspective from guys or non-women who, it's not even that it was like that expressed, but just like they didn't get Captain Marvel's story because they weren't listening to, women talking about why, her story was different in a lot of ways, but really spoke to people and things like that. And so, to my mind, having Kamala be so into Captain Marvel and talking about why it means so much to her, Marvel knows the critique that that's getting in that regard, and that felt somewhat intentional. And to me, like, I know it was just part of the character, and you kind of had to do it, but it also felt like a little bit of like, no. Captain Marvel is a really important part of the MCU and really important to a lot of the fans, and so we're going to show that.
They did not have to do Ms. Marvel yet. Ms. Marvel was only created in 2014. So, like, she is still, I mean, she's quickly outpacing comic sales to probably, it's looking like she's actually going to surpass Spider-Man and the Amazing Spider-Man comic sales, honestly. That's how insane it is.
Right.
They didn't have to do her yet. She's still a young character. They could have waited, and I love that we did it now because I love Iman Vellani. My one disappointment is that we probably will not get her friendship with Miles Morales because they are absolute best friends. I mean, like, to the point where, like, the classic Spider-Man Mephisto storyline, Miles makes a deal to save Kamala's life. That's how close they are.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad that we're not going to get that. And, they could have waited and they could have, like, sold it by having the two of them be absolute best friends and stuff. But they chose to do her now. And for a variety of reasons, for wanting to have better representation. She has a great storyline. People connect with her. And people had a lot of hate for Carol Danvers and Captain Marvel. And they weren't listening. But maybe now they would, because you have this other character that pretty much is so widely loved and received. So
while I appreciate, like, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, it's just I'm sure that was part of their intention of choosing to do Ms. Marvel now.
The only thing I really have to say about Carol Danvers and Captain Marvel is the only reason that I didn't enjoy that as much as I could have is the same reason that I don't read comics before going into a movie, also because I'm awful at reading, is because I don't want to have like a standard to compare to. And Earth's Mightiest Heroes did such a good job with Carol Danvers that I just felt like the movie didn't quite hit that standard that the show gave me.
Yeah.
So it was a preference thing overall. But in regards to Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan, like I never read the comics for that either, but because my friends knew that I'm Pakistani and into superheroes and all that, like they would send me like snippets of it. And I would really enjoy reading it, which is why I was so excited for this character, because she's just such a well-written character and did a fantastic job. But for video gamers out there, like the Avengers video game was about Miss Marvel. She was the main character. Her job was to bring the Avengers back together because they were broken up. Like I could not believe how well written she was in that and how amazing that story was for how mediocre the game ended up being. But the story itself, like I was sold on it. It was so good, and like that's what really amped up my hype for this show. So the fact that, like you said, the comics have been doing such a phenomenal job. The story in the game was phenomenal, and then like a couple of years later, like we got the show itself. Like it's very deserving of all the love that it's getting. And before going into it, like there was a lot of people who were like, "Yeah, I'm not too excited for that Miss Marvel show. It seems too kiddie and this and that." And I'm like, I'm gonna be podcasting on it every week. I challenge you to watch it and tell me that you don't like the first episode.
So many people were
like, my mom watches it. I can't get her to watch Marvel stuff at all, and she's like loving it every week, and she's giving me more insight and telling me about the actresses and, you know, breaking down the story. Because I call her before every MCU cast episode, be like, hey, this is something that they talked about in this episode. Like, can you explain this a little more? And now she's diving even deeper because she's watching the show and understanding like why it's so important to me and why I'm loving it so much.
Look, in Feige we trust, okay?
Feige we trust, 100%.
He chooses and he does things very intentionally. He has his hands in everything Marvel, all right? He does things very, very, very intentionally. And choosing when they did Ms. Marvel is as big of a decision as when they brought Carol Danvers in and Captain Marvel in. And if you didn't like the Captain Marvel movie, okay. I mean, not everybody can have as great a taste as I can. That's okay. But, however, don't hate on Carol Danvers and that character just because of one movie. I can say the same thing about Thor: The Dark World. So
but I mean, like hell, I was disappointed that Carol wasn't in Endgame more. I'm disappointed we get to see like more action with her, and I'm so excited for the Marvels now because everyone's got their foundation like set, and now we can just move forward and go into serious character development and storytelling.
Yeah, I think that's really true, and and honestly, my own little bit of representation. And again, I want to not get my hopes too high here because I know it's Marvel and Disney, and like Taika promised us the most like gay movie you'd ever seen with Love and Thunder, and then it really wasn't. That's a whole other topic I can get into. It had some great moments though, to be sure, but to me, when in Kamala's video, you see Captain Marvel fly off, and it's a literal rainbow like that of colors that come out of her. I think that's very intentional. Like, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But to me, there's a lot of ways they've been hinting that. And I think the Carol and Monica could be like, I don't know where it's going to go, but I have a lot of hope for that. So it was one more fun
That one would be a little strange. Her best friend's daughter.
Fair. I know very little about her in the comics. I know very little. Let me correct myself. I know very little about my comics. I've heard people talk about those two together and had not made that connection. You're right. I've also heard about her and Sif being a much more. I'm just saying there being some kind of representation. That was just the first one that I threw out because that's one I've heard. Apparently,
that's just as interesting as Steve Rogers and Sharon Carter.
I mean, yeah, they've gone there before, unfortunately. So.
But you notice how they nixed that real fast in the bud, too.
I'm just saying I want the representation. You're right. Monica's the wrong name to come to mind in that moment. I apologize.
So, Matt, Taika, I believe his intentions was for Valkyrie and finding her queen and stuff like that. And then I think it just turned into too much when he was also trying to do Mighty Thor and such, because Taika is not afraid.
Oh no! I
bring in the gay.
I don't think that was Taika. I think that was a combination of Disney saying we're going to go so far and so far, and also, as you said, there's a lot of footage that got left on the table.
Yeah,
so and that's a whole other topic. Yeah,
and I think it'd be really great if Carol. It'd be great if Carol was. That'd be a totally different take from the comics and stuff like that. I would love for them to stay with Carol. She's like she's in an interracial relationship, and like for me with my boyfriend being black, I mean, like that's another one of those things that makes me just love her so much, because I'm like, yeah, I'm also with a black dude, you get it.
Right.
And like all the things that come with being in an interracial relationship, and I think it would be amazing if they did that in particular. And in the comics, it's Rhodey. Don Cheadle's a little too old for her, so my personal theory, for all you theory people out there, her man is going to be Sam Wilson, because they are both Air Force, all right, and they're both, military the same way that, Rhodey and her were.
I can see that.
That's my personal hope and prediction, and that they just continue with Valkyrie being the total, gay icon that she is.
Yeah,
and bringing in plenty of other characters as well. I mean, they can do the Wiccan and Hulkling storyline. They can do anything they want.
I think there's so much things they could do. Yeah, and I'm not saying it has to be Carol. I do think there's been some queer coding with that character that's somewhat intentional that I'd be a little disappointed by. But it can. I mean, it certainly can be also her in an interracial relationship with someone who's not a guy, not Monica. We've established, but there's lots of possibilities there. I just wanted to point out the rainbow, like. It really meant a lot to me.
Marvel, so we'll see. If you're listening, Marvel, do not make it Monica. That would be very awkward.
Not Monica. Thank you very much.
Abort.
The one other thing I was going to say, though, also is I didn't realize that Ms. Marvel and Miles were good friends in the comics.
Yes.
I would love to see that. I'm not giving hope up entirely. Because I think we could have a live action Miles. That would be fantastic.
I just don't know when.
I recently did an episode with the folks over at the I recently did an episode with the Hype is My Superpower podcast, which is great coverage of comics. We're talking about the future of the MCU and stuff like that. And I said, look, we have the technology and we're in a multiverse now. All things can happen. Let's just, Roger Rabbit it. Like, animated Miles is part of the universe. Make it happen somehow.
That'd be cool.
I don't care. I just Miles Morales, the Into the Spider-Verse was such a good movie. I'd love to see that representation. All right, but we are so far off topic now.
Yes.
So let me pull it back somewhat. Any other last thoughts from either of you? Any kind of parts of the representation we haven't covered, or things that you wanted to talk about, or why the show meant a lot to you?
In terms of, because I know that you really loved that, Echo did not have both her legs, and they really showed, you were talking about how it was the same, like, prosthetic and everything. One thing I was hoping for, they, like, hinted at it that, like, Bruno got, like, injured and stuff like that, and he actually ends up needing, like, creating his own technology, essentially, to help, like, his body function. I kind of wish that they had done that, because it would have been cool. It would have been really great representation. I mean, they have Echo that she was born that way, but then you could also have people that end up in accidents, and then they also need assistive technology in different ways. Yeah. So that's kind of like a missed opportunity, but again, they had so much storyline going on that it could come in play, or it could not come in play.
And I don't think we've seen the end of Bruno by any means.
No.
So I think that's certainly a strong possibility.
That's like, that's her main guy.
I was going to ask about that, because certainly along with her being the awkward, I like that the awkward girl has boys falling for her on various continents. Like, that was great.
I was like, that never happened to me in school. What is this? Is
Bruno a love interest in the comics? Because I really like that they left it a way of, like, he could have a crush on her, or he could just be a friend who's a little jealous because they're just losing time with her.
He is in love, fully head over heels in love with her, and she is as well. She ends up getting really huge crushes. It's interesting, they kind of separated Red Dagger and Kamran, like, they made them two separate characters. In the comics, they're one character.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's one character. And so they kind of separated them, which was interesting to see. So it'll be interesting to see, like, in terms of, you know, like, relationship wise, what directions they go with. It's kind of, they're still not officially together in the comics. It's they've kissed, and they had an awkward conversation recently about how, like, it was a really good kiss, but we're friends, and there's still like a lot of open, awkward conversation to be had. So they could go really any direction. I know that at points in the comics, Kamala didn't necessarily want to pursue things because she was afraid that even though they liked Bruno, they wouldn't fully accept him as a romantic partner because he is white and not a Muslim. So there's a lot of really great storytelling that they could have with those interracial relationships, and with family being accepting of interracial relationships.
Definitely.
Yeah, you definitely confused me on our weekly texting when you were like, "Oh, Red Dagger looks so cool," and then we saw like Red Dagger later, and I was like, "Is it Carmine or is it Kareem?" Because they have really similar names too, and I'm very confused on which one Red Dagger.
They did that intentionally because they separated. It's like two different personalities now.
Yeah,
I loved it because both those characters were awesome.
I'm all about Kareem.
It's awesome to see both of them. It's awesome to see like they had like a little bit of tension. I'm curious to see the story, but also like I am so sick of the friend zone nonsense as a plot line. You know, the best friend who has a secret crush, and now the new guy comes around and he's so jealous and upset about it. And I felt like with Bruno, like I was so scared they were going to go into that, and they really didn't. They just showed him as like, okay, this is a change with my friend, and that I you know, I think he felt a little shut out because the two of them were able to connect in ways he couldn't, and he was feeling some of that. And there was some just like teen boy awkwardness that, yeah, maybe it's a little bit of jealousy, but like it felt like that's again one big trope that they kind of like, hey, we're going to show this thing that could become this trope, but it's not. We're actually going to show that there's depth and realness here that I really appreciated.
And Bruno's definitely like, some people like him in the comics and some people hate him in the comics. And I feel like, especially because everybody's like, he would have made the perfect Peter Parker all over social media for that particular actor. I feel like he has a lot more love from this show than he ever did from the comics. Because I'm telling you, people are not a fan of Bruno in the comics. It's definitely like, I'd say 70% of people like him and then 30% hate him.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's funny. I've heard people not like his depiction in the show either. Like he's just annoying and whiny and stuff like that. I was like, what show are you watching? But to each their own.
Yeah. And I love that they showed that one thing I think a lot of these shows and movies can often do is give you a white character who spends the whole movie or TV show asking about things, and it's sort of like the audiences. It's a way to be like, hey, white people, we're making this for you, as a way for you to learn about this through him. And the fact that Bruno wasn't that he already knew all those things, and so he wasn't going to be the
best friend since kindergarten. Like, of course he's gonna know like some basic terminology in Urdu, and he's gonna know, you know, the. He
made a voice assistant that understands Urdu.
Zoo.
That was so good. That was
and
so
it's called
good.
Zuzu.
I love it. All right, Zuhair, anything last things from you?
Just touching a little bit on all the Karachi sequences, like I don't think it gets appreciated enough, but the generational conversations between Nani, Mom, and Kamala, and that level of like understanding each other and explaining each other and trying to look from each other's eyes instead of like the tunnel vision of like what's right and what's wrong and how you're supposed to live your life. Like a lot of that stuff is really beautiful. And me as a photographer, like in the past few years, you know, whether it be from accidents or health concerns, stuff like that, like I've lost a few friends, and you look back and realize you don't have any pictures with them, because in a generation where we can have access to photos so easily, we have to make sure that we look all prim and proper for everything, and everything has to be post-worthy and blah, blah, blah. But then it's like, what if that person dies tomorrow? Like, does all that stuff matter then anymore? So like for the photo of her Nani to have the picture of her and her parents when she was a child, because it's the only photo of Aisha that there is, like that stuff was super powerful. And the importance of legacy and history and understanding your culture and where you come from, and the openness of being able to talk to your family and challenge them to share their uncomfortable experiences, because there's no record of stuff like that. Like, it all is stories between families, and showing that, I think it was really underappreciated, and they could have expanded on it a little more. But man, it brought tears to my eyes with how beautiful it was.
And actually showing and having conversations about things like partition. I mean, like, I highly doubt Disney will allow it, but I can't stress how much I want them to talk about Kashmir and as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you touched on partition. Now let's get even bigger. Let's get deeper.
Yeah, I mean, and especially because I mean, there's so much that goes into both of those conflicts, as well as some of the others around the world. I'm not trying to simplify them, but you know, a professor I had liked to point out that like a number of the places where the worst kind of like ethnic religious tension over shared land is happening are areas that are former British colonies, where the British divided people as a way to kind of, and I really like the way they showed that. And one small detail that I think I understood this is why, but Zuhair, I'm curious your thoughts on it. Now, this is going to be our closing. I noticed that, like Emily said, I watched in subtitles, and so they would show, like on the screen, it would say speaking in Urdu.
Mm-hmm.
And then they went to Pakistan, and when her mother and even Kamala was, I think mostly her mother was speaking to her mother and the other family, sometimes it said speaking in Hindi, and I could hear the difference. And at first I was like, wait, why are they doing that? And then I realized, wait a minute, this is part of the part. My understanding is this is part of the partition story. But yeah, that these were folks who their parents grew up in India and probably did speak Hindi and maybe also spoke Urdu. But so yeah, they of course would still speak it, even though they're Muslims in Pakistan.
Yeah. So quick history lesson on how the language of Urdu came to be is it's actually a mix of 3 different languages, but Urdu primarily is Hindi. So you have not only the rule of the Mughal Empire, where Muslims took over India, so Arabic started to get introduced, and then like Pakistan, because there's like, you know, damn near 300 languages in India alone. So in the Pakistan part of it, you had not only the Mughal influence, so you're speaking Arabic with your Urdu, but your primary trade was with the Turkish empires. And those neighbors all speak Farsi. So with Karachi being like the San Diego of Pakistan, and the whole region of Pakistan being so close to Europe and Turkish countries and Farsi-speaking countries, while still being attached to India, there was like a melting pot. And Urdu actually developed over time as a language, being a mix of those 3. So when I watch Bollywood movies, I understand them speaking Hindi because Urdu primarily is Hindi, but there's like mixes where like Arabic has like its influence and Farsi has its influence. And now because of British rule, like there's just a lot of English in there. Like they just don't make up Urdu words for it. You just throw in the English version of it because it's such a prominent part of the prominent part of the language.
Yeah, there's like movies like from the Philippines and stuff like that I've seen, and I understand most of what they're saying because it's English and Spanish is a lot of the words, where you can kind of get the grasp of what's happening. It's a very similar story for Afghanistan and how Pashto developed, and their different dialects of northern and southern Pashto as well.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
I mean, I teach Filipino martial arts, and a lot of the dialogue, it's like the only reason I picked up on it is because I took Spanish in high school, and a lot of it just is Spanish words or variations of Spanish words.
It is. It's wild.
So it's like, how much of this is Spanish and how much of this is like actual Tagalog?
It's linguistics anthropology. I mean, it's cultural diffusion.
It's so fascinating.
Cultural diffusion. It's how culture and language and everything's developed over time.
Yeah. It's just amazing stuff. Well, I'm so glad you could both be on here. Thank you both so much for this conversation. And you're both amazing content creators in your own right. So for people who, I hope people have been listening to the great stuff you're doing on other places, but for those who aren't, where can they find more of you? Emily, you want to start?
Yeah. So again, I'm a teacher. You can find me at a lot of comic conventions. I just finished up my last one at AwesomeCon, but I will find out mid to late August if I will be at New York Comic Con, the big one, presenting, which is very exciting. And then as well as that, my boyfriend does a sports podcast, the 323 with Reed Murphy, that I'm on a lot, and so is Zoo. He's like a regular co-host now.
I love being on that show. I laugh harder on that show more than I ever have on any other.
So
hey, look, Go ahead.
Sorry, if you like sports, but we do a lot of pop culture and stuff like that. And that I do my own podcast that doesn't come out nearly as often as it should, but it's Emily Cissell Asks What If, which is where I take moments in sports history and I ask what if something slightly has changed and how does that have a bigger societal impact. But yeah.
That's awesome. And hey, I have been a long-suffering Mets fan for many years when they were not worth talking about. They're in first place now. They're doing good. So if you ever need someone else on to talk baseball, I'd be happy to come on.
Reed always needs baseball people. He doesn't know baseball.
Sure. Point it my way. Zuhair, what about yourself? I think we mentioned 1 or 2 podcasts you're on, but just give people the rundown of how to find you.
1 or 2. Miss Marvel has had me on a gauntlet lately. So as Emily mentioned, I hop on 323, especially when we talk about DC sports. But whenever we get to talk about pop culture on there, it's so much fun. Primarily, you can find me at Animation Deliberation, where we talk about animated content. We just recently finished Young Justice. It's such a phenomenal show. We did Big Hero 6 and the Baymax miniseries, which was a lot of fun. We just, right before coming on here, we recorded our reaction to... Oh my God, why am I forgetting the name? Harley Quinn season 3. We did the trailer reaction of that because the show comes on. We're going to have Emily to talk on about a couple episodes too because she's just ecstatic over it.
I will definitely want both of you on for Harley Quinn, as well, on this side of things because that show raises some very interesting ethical questions.
I love it.
So good. So good.
And what's fun is that we've been doing a lot of interviews lately too. So the one that we did last week was with Zach Barrick, who is credited as the first openly trans actor to be credited in an MCU movie. So it was fun talking to him and how he landed that role and what it was like working with Marvel and John Watts and to promote his new show on Netflix. So we're doing a lot of fun stuff over there. And then if you want to hear my instant reactions to Ms. Marvel, then Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast is the place to go for that.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you both so much. I'm going to have show notes for all the things they talk. All the things they talked about will be in the show notes with links so you can find them. Thank you both so much. And of course, we love feedback here. So let us know, what do you think? What did you think of the show? What spoke to you? Did you feel represented by it? Or do you feel like you really learned things by watching it? What do you think of what we talked about? Do you have things you agree with, things you disagree with? Let us know. All the feedback you can find on theethicalpanda.com. There you'll find our Twitter, our Facebook, our email. And of course, also there you can find all of the podcasts that I do. This podcast, Superhero Ethics, Star Wars Universe podcast. We did episode by episode coverage of Kenobi. We're getting excited for Andor now, which we're really looking forward to. We're gonna have a lot of fun talking about that one. All sorts of stuff like that. So please check those out. And most importantly, as fans, be good to each other.